Focus on the savvy side of 9 to 5 with the Focus Group.
Try, really try.
Listen, laugh, and learn with Tim and John.
I never try anything. I just do it.
Hey, welcome back to the Focus Group. Tim Bennett here with my good friend and co-host John Nash. We are the Focus Group. Be sure to follow along with us throughout the week is probably the best way to find us is at focusgroupradio.com, and you can download any of our audio or video shows, current and past, which we've got some past. We're going to put together a best of playlist, I think, John.
I think it's a great idea.
A fun thing. Yeah. And we expect our guest today to be part of that best of. We've got Meghan Maury joining us today, and she's policy director at the LGBTQ Task Force. And John had been at an event and met Meghan, and we thought it would be good as we approach the midterms to educate ourselves a little more about what's going on, particularly with LGBTQ rights and what we need to know related to the Supreme Court picks and religious liberty laws and the census and all that sort of stuff. So welcome to the Focus Group.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So
why don't you first tell us a little bit about the task force?
I was going to say, for people who don't know.
Yeah, sure. So the National LGBTQ Task Force is the nation's oldest LGBTQ organization. We've been around for decades doing work for public policy and organizing around LGBTQ rights.
So are you guys based in D.C., or are you based in New York, or are you based in New York, or how's it?
We're based in D.C. We have a New York office, and we also actually have a Miami office, which is
makes sense.
fun. I don't get to be based there.
Why do you think that makes sense? Why is there a Miami office?
Well, we've actually been working there for years, and we run a circuit party there called Winter Party. It's Party with a Purpose.
That's you guys?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And we donate a huge proportion of the proceeds to local nonprofits that are doing LGBTQ work.
Somebody
Very
have
cool.
a thing for Miami?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought maybe you could have done L.A. or Chicago, but Miami's a good place to go in the winter.
Yeah.
And so your New York office, are you guys just an arm, or are there specific things regionally that you would do different than they might do nationally out of D.C.?
Yeah, well, it's mostly our fundraising and development staff that are here in New York and me. So that's pretty awesome.
Not fundraising?
But not so much. No, I mostly just do our policy work. And most of our policy staff is actually based in D.C. I go back and forth quite a bit. But we also, it's fun. We get to sort of meet more of the fundraising folks here in New York, and it's a great time.
Wow.
So when you're in New York, you're working on something that fascinates me. And it's this program you guys have, which I think more of our listeners need to be aware of. It's called FedWatch. And this is this your brainchild, FedWatch?
It was me and my colleague sitting on my couch who dreamed it up. Yes.
So why don't you tell us about FedWatch? Because I think this is one of those interesting things that it's under the radar, in my opinion.
Yeah, so here's the thing. When Congress passes a law, they pass it over to federal agencies and they say, hey, federal agency,
implement.
Take a look at this law, implement it, enforce it, do your thing. The federal agencies then do a bunch of work around it. And when they're doing that work, because we as a country believe in democracy and transparency, they're required to tell us how they're doing it and ask for our opinion on how they're doing it. And they do that in the form of regulations. Now, I know you all know a lot about business, and regulation can be kind of a bad word in the business world. Right. But really what regulations are the implementation enforcement mechanisms of all laws. So they're what makes us have secret seatbelts in cars, and what makes us have safe ladders, but also how we enforce civil rights.
So if Congress passes a law, then when it gets to the federal agency and they have to implement the law, do they go back to Congress? Or is that
No, they're just interpreting and implementing and enforcing the law that has been kind of handed off to them through these regulations. So they have to post these regulations in the Federal Register. Now that gives us all the opportunity to weigh in. That's super fun. But here's the problem. The Federal Register is like 200 to 300 pages every single day, meaning that's like 1,000 to 1,500 pages a week of information to
newly
sort
posted
through.
Info.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. And that's where FedWatch comes in. So FedWatch does the work of weeding through all that information and helping our social justice colleagues know when there's an opportunity to weigh in.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we sort of crowdsource resources for folks. So if, let's say, there's a public comment period on youth homelessness, and I want to comment about how LGBTQ young people will be impacted by that program. But I know that there's also a piece about young folks living with disabilities, but that's not my expertise. I might reach out to a colleague in FedWatch and say, can you give me talking points or a little background info so I can make sure that I'm writing a nuanced comment that includes everybody in it?
And that you give back to the agency
Yeah.
to say, as you implement this nebulous law that just got handed down
Right.
from the Hill, please consider this. Now, this FedWatch is how you also actually figured out some of the shenanigans with this national census, right?
Yes, yeah. So in a couple different ways. So through the Federal Register, the Census Bureau posts kind of everything that it's ever doing. So everything from when they add the citizenship question to the census to their decision not to include sexual orientation and gender identity questions in the census, that all filters through the Federal Register at some point. So when we are reading through the Federal Register and learning about the surveys that the Census Bureau is fielding, we can find in there that they've made changes to these surveys and weigh and tell them that they need to be doing a better
So did
job.
they, in fact, because we reported on that, I would guess, probably 6 months ago, that there was lots of talk that the Trump administration had removed all the questions related to LGBTQ folks, and then someone came back and said, well, no, not really. It hasn't even been developed yet. So where do we stand on the census? And when is the
Yeah.
census?
That is the census.
Oh,
is
and
for 2020.
I'll add one last question. Is there an expectation that with the volume of information going on to this database, that you can just because it's gonna if you miss it, you miss it, and it's done. It can go under the rug. Like, is there a thought that, hey, we'll just pull that question, no one's gonna notice? I mean,
Absolutely. And
Really?
in fact, the Census Bureau fielded a survey called the Census Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators Survey a few months ago. And they, at the very last minute, they had published the survey. It included a question about sexual orientation in it to find out how LGBTQ people were feeling about the census. It included a sexual orientation question at the very last minute, literally the morning before it was supposed to get finalized. They decided to pull that question. And if we hadn't been paying attention, we never would have known.
did you get them to reinstate it?
We did, actually. It was a success. The whole sort of
So
social
you did by
justice,
lobbying
census
with
advocacy community.
the federal agency in charge of the census.
Exactly, right.
So do the other, I'll just pull one just because it's at the top of mind. So would other LGBT organizations like HRC look to you guys, or are you just all, you do what you guys do, they do what they do, or do you
Yeah,
ever
no,
share
I mean,
Like
we-
siloed or
Yeah.
We work
compartmentalized,
together.
yeah.
So the task force has a theory of change that where we believe that working together in coalition is the best way to get anything done, right? It gets us the most information. It helps us be the most effective. We work together. We do all that together.
Rising tide lifts all boats.
That's right. And FedWatch is actually kind of like a movement infrastructure tool, not just for the LGBT movement, but for social justice movements at large, where people are getting information from FedWatch, the network. They do often look to us for expertise on regulatory policy in general, because we do read the Federal Register every day, so we just know so much stuff about it. But we also crowdsource information from our partners all the time. There might be something they're paying more attention to and have more
How
detail.
many people are coming through this stuff?
There are about 6 of us in what we
You
call the
read this
FedWatch
stuff
Brain Trust.
every week?
Yeah,
You
I
read
actually
every
read
day?
it every day.
Wow.
Think about that. But if you're publishing how many pages a day?
200 to 300 pages. a
200
day.
300 pages of information based on so do you specifically look at certain administration areas, health and human services, housing and urban development? You may and because other ones may not be there, those issues, an LGBT issue might not wind through something like commerce quite as much as it might through something that's touching a human being.
Yeah, oddly, Commerce actually manages the Census Bureau. So
Oh, all right. So you're looking at their stuff
we
too.
look at everything
Well, probably the
because-
Small Business Administration.
Yeah, they have a
Yeah.
minority development corporation that does work with generally people of color and LGBTQ folks. But we look through all of it because things pop up in weird spots. Like this morning, there was a listing about the National Park Service, and they're making a whole new rule about protest in D.C., like where you can demonstrate, how many people. can
Oh, like
demonstrate
use of the
without
mall and stuff like that,
Yeah.
right?
To limit the use of signs in protests. So all of these changes that are going to have a direct impact on our ability to advocate as a community.
Now, were you an attorney? What did you do before
I
this?
am an attorney.
You are? Okay.
Yes.
I'm guessing because
You'd
you
have to be to want to read through.
and
I
attorneys
know.
read and
Attorneys love
that.
reading documents. They love going through
Before
stuff.
that, I was a tax accountant. So it
Oh,
kind of
for
goes
good
to
gosh,
my
a tax
nerd
accountant and an
sense.
attorney.
Yeah.
Those two, that's, yeah.
You're a lot of fun on Saturday. You're going to be watching that documentary with John.
With the wine going up, you're not getting that deduction. And by the way,
you're not watching I Am Sam Kinison.
I'd watch that too. Let's be real.
So you were an attorney before, and then how long have you been with the task force?
For a little over 5 years, and we launched FedWatch pretty soon after I got there. So that program has been in place for almost 5 years now too.
Wow.
all right, so you're going to be coming back again and again, so you'll have to keep us up to date on what's going on with FedWatch.
Sure.
On the horizon, we know that regardless of how slow walking or how Chuck Schumer wants to slow walk the confirmation hearings, they will happen soon for Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah. What's your sense of that, or what should we be looking at for the hearings? I mean, let's face it, I think all of us are under the impression that there's enough votes to confirm. Maybe not if Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski decide to go the opposite direction, but for the moment, there seems to be a majority that would confirm him to the bench.
Yeah, there's definitely still a couple people on the fence, and we're working hard to drive calls to their office and industry visits to make
West
sure that...
Virginia.
Is he on the fence?
Yeah,
there are
he's
several
always on the
folks.
fence. He's afraid because he's, West Virginia is very.
Was Paul on the Rand Paul on the fence too?
No, he was a no, but the way he always ends up being a yes.
He'll flip.
So what?
I'm not sure I necessarily trust his public
No.
statements.
So they said that what I thought the holdup might be with him is they said he was just on a sheer time. They're not able to get all the papers to everybody that they need, all of his writings.
Sheer discovery process.
Right, that it would take too long in order to have the vote before the midterms. But they're saying that obviously Ryan and McConnell are going to push it through anyway. But I thought that there was, I guess there's no rules anymore. I mean, look what happened with Obama having it open for 11 months, right? So
exactly.
I thought that might hold it up, but you guys think it'll go full steam ahead?
I think there's still a chance. I think there are a lot of even super conservative folks who believe in transparency, and there are just reams and reams and reams of documents that haven't been released. There was a release last night of maybe 12,000 pages, but that's only a sliver of what
12,000 pages
I know, and I think
of decisions.
Federal Register's reading is a lot, but there's not just decisions, but papers from when he was working in the White House. So there is just a ton of
You work for
Bush
to
be done.
George W., right?
Yep. And folks, reasonably think that the work that he did during that time period is relevant to what he's going to do on the bench. We're all human. We all make decisions based on the experiences we've had in our lives. So people really want to have a chance to look through that material before a confirmation happens. And I think that gets to some of what I'm the most scared about. We know that no matter who the president nominates for this seat, they're probably not going to be as progressive as I would like them to be. They're not going to...
Well, truth be told, Kennedy was not exactly...
progressive.
A reliable progressive. In fact, he wasn't.
Not.
In fact, it was his vote that gave the election to Bush and Bush v. Gore with the Chads and that whole Florida thing. And I think people forget that. So he tended to be someone who did it case by case, but and I don't know how you would classify his decisions with gay marriage or some other ones as being humanist or whatever you might call it. But no, he was never a reliable progressive vote.
He made very conservative decisions on everything from criminal justice to voting rights to schools access. I mean, he really was not a progressive member of.
But then he surprises with some decisions that
Is there ever a way you could remove a Supreme Court justice?
You could, in principle. I don't know that it's ever been done.
No, I've never ever heard of that being done. You could do the opposite. You could do what the Democrats would love to do, which is they would love to add like 5 more seats to the bench. So you have a Supreme Court with 14 judges.
Right? And we've had a different number of Supreme Court justices throughout history. So that's not unprecedented to have a different number of people on the court. But my biggest concern about the Kavanaugh nomination is not actually about his opinions on sexual orientation and gender identity or on voting rights, although I am concerned about all those things. It's more about how he feels about presidential power.
Yeah.
He is all about the power of the executive.
Yeah,
and
that does.
We have someone in power right now who is looking
It's all about the power of the executive.
Because he felt during the Clinton impeachment that a sitting president should not be held
accountable
for anything.
Yeah.
And that's the
Specifically, he
danger.
couldn't be indicted or subpoenaed.
Right.
Two legal mechanisms to get that.
And essentially, our form of democracy, obviously, no one's above the law.
Sure.
And that includes the president. But his feeling is, no, a president, almost as if he's a dictator.
Can do what he wants,
Can do what he
right.
wants, which I believe, I agree with you. That's a danger because.
I'll just
It's
play
the Wild
devil's
West.
advocate and say there's a whole group of conservatives and libertarians who think that that whole question of executive power is actually still open to interpretation. And they'll look at each administration, and when Obama was president, the Republicans railed against the amount of executive orders he rolled out, saying, you can't do this, we're the ones who make the laws, you're making So I think you could see both sides of the equation, but I do agree that at the very base principle, he's an elected official, he comes from the populace, he should be constrained by the same rules and regulations that we are as well. So if you can indict somebody, if you could subpoena somebody, why would it not be him as well? I don't see how that,
It's Animal Farm, right?
Yeah.
All animals are equal. Some are more equal than others.
Oh, it's amazing how the books you read, like the Lord of the Flies, Animal Farm, like go back to some of these books
like
we
the
read
high
as
school
kids.
summer
Yeah,
reading
exactly. The high school summer reading list. So, moving on from Supreme Court for a sec, one thing you and I talked about when we spoke earlier in the week was the importance of the census, and specifically your drive to make sure that if people get the census, answer it, be counted.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing, over the last year when we've been sort of fighting with the administration about the sexual orientation and gender identity questions, we really haven't wanted to lose the thread that we need to fill out the census no matter what.
Yeah.
The census drives more than $800 billion in federal funding. It's how we draw our legislative districts. It's how we are represented in the House of Representatives. And it's also how we enforce civil rights protections. So no matter what, the census is important regardless of whether we can self-identify.
You said it's
I agree.
2020?
Yeah, it's in 2020. It should be coming to your houses between January and April of 2020. Fill it out. There's also a long-form census that we call the American Community Survey that comes out every year. And a lot of these funding decisions hinge on that as well, too. So, I mean, it's important to fill that out as well. And that's where those sexual orientation and gender identity questions were set to go.
The
is on the
community, the
long-
long form. Okay.
The long form census,
okay.
which gets us really just tons of data about people's access to housing, to health care, to even food access. Right? Questions about that are on that long form census. And that's
We had someone on from SAGE, and
it's
he had
so
talked about that,
important.
particularly with
So
elders,
important.
LGBT elders, and the importance of the funding and so filling it out. So, what do you think about? I have a note here. And I
In
think
purple.
I got this gay pen
It's a
from
note in purple.
Brian at Admark 360. When the purple goes, it goes yellow, and I'm gonna have to get y'all pens.
You mean it literally runs
changes color.
down? It's like
Runs
the
down.
everlasting
Really exciting.
gobstopper
Then
from
it'll
Willy
be
Wonka
yellow,
and the
then
Chocolate Factory.
But great toys
all
here.
all these religious liberty laws, and there was one that just I was reading on the way on the train today up from Philly, one that was just passed over or was put forward on Friday through the Labor Department or something. But to me, that these religious liberty bills are really just a smokescreen for evangelical Christians, because what happens when someone else says, well, my religion says I can smoke marijuana, or my religion says I'm a vegetarian, or I'm in prison and I don't want to eat pork, or do you see these things really having any teeth? Or
Yeah, unfortunately I do. So I think for folks who don't know, religious exemptions laws were put in place to protect people of minority faiths. So people who didn't want to eat pork when they were incarcerated, right? To protect women who wanted to wear hijab in a place where head coverings are prohibited. That's what those were put in place for. But right now, religious conservatives are using these religious exemptions laws to support a complete undermining of non-discrimination protections and access to reproductive health care for women. We've seen both at the federal government, at state and local level, this just swarm of religious exemptions laws getting passed, and then at the federal level, federal agencies putting out regulations that say, or guidance that say, you can have a religious exemption to this generally applicable law, right?
and they were citing the recent Master Cake
Right.
decision.
Yeah, so Department of Labor said if people want to discriminate on the basis of their supposed faith, they can discriminate in employment on the basis of Masterpiece Cake and other federal court decisions. Except Masterpiece didn't say that.
No,
Right?
it was the narrowest decision.
was
All it
tiny.
basically said was the Colorado Civil Rights Commission might have shown bias against the baker, and therefore the case should never have gone as high as it did.
Right.
But that's it. It basically
Right.
said, well, we think there might have been a couple people that were against you down on this level. So if someone went into that guy's shop today, he denies them a cake, the whole case could happen again.
Exactly, and as long as the Civil
This
Rights Commission
doesn't show bias.
show bias in the way that they did, it's a completely different case than what reached the Supreme Court. So that Department of Labor guidance that came out is relying on a decision that doesn't actually say that you can discriminate against LGBT.
So what can the normal Joe do in these cases? Do we just have, I don't want to say rely on, but is that where the importance of the task force comes in to make sure that they're the watchdog of these things to protect us? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Megan
not
is
just
the sole gatekeeper
Yes,
of
of all
300
things.
pages a day. Yeah.
No, I am not. I'm not. I think there's a lot people can do on the state and local level to fight against legislation that's happening there that explicitly allows discrimination around against LGBTQ people. There are a number of like adoption and foster care laws, for example, that explicitly say it's okay for these faith-based service providers to discriminate against against LGBTQ people who want to adopt or foster care. At the federal level, I think it's about us speaking up, paying attention, weighing in, saying this is not the law. You can't just cite a decision and cite something that it didn't say.
You know, I always go back to unless I'm missing something from my poli-sci classes or my government classes from high school and college, religion's already protected.
Yeah.
The freedom to worship in your chosen area, your house of worship, that is protected by the Constitution. So this whole thing is, you and I talked about this on the phone, this is just this interesting game of getting one group's agenda pushed forward. I mean,
It's evangelical Christian. That's why I said it seems like a smokescreen just for their
I'm
agenda.
going to throw a stat out. It's not I don't know the exact number, but it is the fastest diminishing group in the white Christian thing is, at least in America.
Well, religion in general, right?
We're fast becoming a secular society, which I think would scare the crap out of you if you think you got to live by a certain set of rules or something. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean we're protected both. We're protected to express our religion, but we're also protected from
Being forced
being
to
forced
practice
into a
it, yeah.
particular kind of religion, and I think that's part of what's getting lost in this.
Not a
conversation
theocracy.
too, right?
Well, apparently the state religion of the United States is evangelical Christendom because you have Mike. I mean, I don't think I'm saying out
That's
of.
where the power is.
I don't think I'm saying it out of turn, but we know who turned out and gave them a mulligan, held their nose against all hypocrisy. Flip the lever.
Yeah.
I want that big tie. I want to tie that big too.
Yes.
See what happens. We'll see how strong they are when the N-word videos come out. We'll see what happens.
Oh, we were talking about that earlier, Omarosa.
Yeah.
And the book.
I am interested to see how whether the
I can
people
explain
who
that
stood
one
by
away.
him continue to.
Oh,
do
I think
so.
they will.
You can explain that one
I
away.
think someone said that that those, it's a cult, and if you believe to that level, you're just gonna, it doesn't matter. It's another thing, whatever.
I like
He
to
didn't mean
believe.
it.
I like to believe that people have deeply held morals that they will stick by. But I know it's silly.
No. Hey, look, we've traveled around the country. We've done road trips for VW, and we've traveled on business. And I'm with you. The vast majority of people I met have been fantastic, and
Yeah.
they seem to come from. But you never know. You just never know, right? All right, we are going to have you on again, and we are going to have you on again. It's Meghan Maury. Got the last name Maury, right?
Perfect.
I don't know why I would just say Maury.
And Meghan is the policy director
Maury.
of the National LGBTQ Task Force. Website for the task force?
Is www.thetaskforce.org.
I like branding when it's done simply. Thetaskforce.org. Boom, done. All right, Meghan, thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you on again. And we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we have a little item about traveling the New York City subway system in the summertime. It's very hot. That's in the nutshell.
Oh, the show's over.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Yeah, show's over. It's hot.
Brought to you by Volkswagen. Visit VW.com to learn more.